in this video, we're doing the second half of the 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem by Nathaniel Brandon. Thanks for sharing that, Will. I'm going to overlay a nice clean image of the book on top anyway, but I appreciate you putting up.
That's the reason I brought it. Part 2.
So in this half, we're doing this last 3 pillars, which are the practice of self-assertiveness, the practice of living purposefully, and the practice of personal integrity, and then also the external factors to self-esteem. Good shit.
Cool. Yeah, good stuff. And just a reminder that we covered the first 3, which were living consciously, self-acceptance, and self-responsibility, in case
we did
forgot what those were. Cool. So I reckon a good place to start would probably be on self-assertiveness, which is pillar number 4. And he describes this as honoring our wants, needs, and values and seeking appropriate forms of their expression. So a nice, clear, crisp definition. This is something I thought about a lot in a cultural context, which he talks about in the external factors to do with self-esteem later on in the book. And I suppose that was something that was resonating with me, was how I found my upbringing, particularly being from England as well, I felt aspects that I wasn't particularly self-assertive because I found that went against the cultural conserve that I grew up in. I know there's a lot more to unpack about this, but that's the bit that stood out quite strongly to me.
So the culture you lived in, you feel you didn't nurture your self-assertiveness?
No. I think it, I guess it always felt in a way rude to assert your wants and needs.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this last time, but I talked about, like, as a kid at least, when you like going to mates' houses and like always turning down stuff I was offered even if I wanted it.
Yeah,
like,
I know. It's shocking,
do you want a snack? Do you want a drink? No, thanks. But I did.
Yeah, and I think later in life, I always found self-assertiveness linked with arrogance almost, and it's taken me It's taken me a long amount of time to actually realize that it's not a negative trait to be assertive. I guess I always associated being assertive with being aggressive.
Yeah, like a negative.
Yeah, negative. So in reading this book, I suppose it's kind of cemented that no, it isn't a negative thing, and also that it's really nurturing for your self-esteem to be able to assert your needs and wants clearly. Yeah. It's a sign, and particularly in that second part of his definition of self-esteem around self-respect. It's really self-esteem enhancing to ask for what you need, feel deserving of getting your needs met and doing things that are in line with your values.
Yeah, I think there's an important distinction there to be made between like your needs and your specific wants. So like in being like deserving of getting your needs met, it doesn't mean that like when I ask this specific person to give me this specific thing that like I'm entitled for them to do that for me. It's more the stance that in general, like I honor my needs and that like I'm happy to ask when I need help, and I'm happy to say no when it's something I don't want or goes against, clashes with my needs. But that if but it's not like, I guess the kind of what you're talking about with coming across as arrogant is that I think the balance would be people would see it as being like selfish or like entitled or something like that to be too dominantly assertive, I guess. Yeah,
and I think it's in part of what he talks about is that this is around confronting things rather than avoiding things. So putting yourself out there in a way to get your needs met. So when you have a choice of saying your preference or doing something that you want to do, you don't avoid that situation for the short-term discomfort. You're willing to confront things for for the long-term benefit of yourself. It's better to live in line with my values if in situations I continually assert that myself.
Yeah. And that each time you don't, we've been using this phrase a lot, but it's like a vote against yourself. It's like,
yeah. He says in the book that this leads to a realized sense of self, in particular to individuation and the building of relationships, which I quite like. So I suppose when you talk about autonomy and making decisions that are best for you and living a life that's in line with your values and your needs, to get that requires a level of self-assertion, being able to put yourself out there, even down to the simple behaviors of, being able to, speak clearly, formulate your ideas, put them across to other people, be able to communicate, be able to listen.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of micro skills involved with this one. And in relation to the building of relationship side of this, obviously that requires communication too. And that would build, a level of, I can say it could build, intimacy and connectedness with people if you're able to assert your needs and wants clearly. People will see you as someone who has their ideas straight and what they want is clear.
Yeah, and it's also quite a vulnerable thing to do, as well. We can see it as maybe culturally see it as being aggressive or overly dominant or authoritative or something, but it's also to say, like, I don't know, like, I need a cuddle isn't wouldn't be seen as aggressive and dominant, would it? It's a vulnerable thing to say. And I guess as well, on top of what you said about relationships, did you mean like romantic, or did you just mean in general?
Friendships, and also, I guess, romantic relationships as well.
Okay, well, with either, if I set a precedent of being someone who's like shares what I want, shares my ideas, shares my feelings, and then conversely, says no and shares what I don't want when it's appropriate, then if that's a consistent part of my character, then people around me, they can be at ease that like, well, Luke must be fine with this, because if he wasn't, he would have said so. I know he would.
Yeah.
So it can put other people at ease, right? Because I know there are times where I feel like uncomfortable, where maybe someone who isn't so self-assertive, or someone I just don't know as well, I might be second guessing. It's like, well, they said they want this, but do they really? Because I don't really want to go forward with it if they don't actually want it and they're just trying to please me. So it makes it a whole mess. If we could just be clear, then it's just so much easier to interact.
Yeah, everyone's just waiting on each other to make a decision. I wonder why. I wonder what the part of it that I personally used to find difficult. I wonder whether if I think someone's being self-assertive, that they're not taking into account other people's needs.
Right. Yeah.
That might be the part of it, that it comes across as selfish and therefore arrogant to presume that your needs are more important than other people's.
Yeah, and I think that's that version of selfishness, that's more like derogatory cultural sense of the word, takes that extra leap that it's not mutually exclusive to honor your own wants and needs and also honor the wants and needs of the people around you. Like, they can all be on the table, right? But I guess that definition we think of as being selfish is to only consider my wants and needs and not care about the others.
Not the wants of others, yeah.
But then the self-sacrificing would be to not care about your own wants and needs and to like put everyone else first all the time to the deficit of yourself.
Yeah, and I guess as time's gone on, I've realized like how annoying it is when someone doesn't know what they want. And something I've always found, more recently found frustrating, is when, you ask someone what they want to do and they say, I don't know, I'm easy.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not that you're like relaxed or spontaneous. It's just that you don't know what you want. And I think
or you're not willing to share it. Yeah.
Or you're not willing to share it. So I think,
And it's not easy.
Yeah.
Like, I'm easy, but it's not, because like I want to know what you want, so we can have a mutual decision.
I don't know if this happened to you, but I've been like, when there's like 4 of you wandering around town looking for somewhere to eat, and it's just like everyone's like, I don't mind, you choose, and then you're like, well, I really want this, and so I was like, oh no, I don't want that. It's just like, if everyone just said like exactly what they wanted, or like if you genuinely didn't care, then you don't get to contribute beyond that to the conversation. But
I guess there's in terms of living consciously and self-acceptance, it's like, if the person genuinely doesn't know what they want most of the time, then that's quite sad, really, because that's a level of sort of repression that has led from somewhere, right, where they've learned that like my wants and needs don't matter so much that like they don't even come to mind anymore, let alone express them.
Yeah. A few people like that. It's hard in those situations where I notice when I go quiet is because I'm scared to assert myself, and often in those situations, particularly in work situations, it's around needing to know information. I need information and knowledge to be able to assert myself. So in regards to my wants and needs, that's knowing my values, what's important to me, where I want to be, what I want to be doing. But in a work setting, it's around, do I have all the information necessary? Am I sure I want to say this? Is this, to the best of my knowledge, correct? What is the purpose of saying this? If I have in any sense any doubt that any of that's missing, I'll tend to go towards the less self-assertive side.
Not sure I'm following. So what do you want the information for?
If I'm sharing, some information about a client that's important to the team in general, like if I don't have all the information, I won't assert myself. Whereas is it like if I didn't have all the information and I said something which demonstrates that I didn't know it all, but they knew that information, then you might come across as looking like you don't know. Like you're misinformed or something. Exactly. And I guess that's probably where the original frustration I had at people being self-assertive was. A lot of it was at when I was at music school in Liverpool, where there was a lot of people who had a lot of charisma, drive, and they would be very good at asserting themselves and putting themselves out there. But a lot of it was just kind of just bullshit, just lies. They were like faking how well they were doing in their careers, how well things were going. I know I've drifted a bit from my last point, but I suppose in my eyes, self-assertiveness comes from a place of truth and a place of knowing. Otherwise, if it's not got those elements to it, then it feels like lying. It feels like just bravado for the sake of bravado.
Well, something this second half of the book really got me thinking about was needs and values. And the way I've kind of formulated it is that needs are just inherent to the organism we are, like, whereas values can be both culturally instilled or chosen consciously. And in bad cases, you can have values which actually clash with your innate needs and that's a kind of recipe for chaos. But like in the example you just used, where it sounds like what Nathaniel Brandon called a sort of pseudo self-esteem, where it's not coming from a place of honoring your true self, but it's coming from a place of making sure you put out a persona so people's image of you is the way you want them to see you.
As opposed to what you actually are.
And then so then what you're asserting isn't your like true needs and chosen values, but the how you want to be perceived by others, which is sort of a different level of assertion, isn't it?
It's makes me think just back to our chat about lying and things like that. They're just kind of
Yeah.
Just the truth they're putting out into the world just eventually won't be reflected back to them. You can make out that your career is going well and life's going great, but then eventually, the truth will come back.
Yeah, well, that's the opposite of what Nathaniel Brandon means by self-assertion, because you're literally hiding parts of yourself.
Yeah, and that's what he talks a lot about, in linking it to like self-acceptance. You have to be able to accept all parts of yourself. Then at that point you would probably be able to assert yourself once you know what you want.
Yeah, it's the more we're talking about this, the more like I feel like what would immediately come to mind with the phrase self-assertion is really not what he means. Like in this case, self-assertion might be like, I'm really scared. And that wouldn't come to mind as a form of self-assertion.
Yeah. And can you be self-assertive, I suppose, linking to this, like with yourself in a sense? Or is he?
I think that's, so people? The way I've understood it, which this came up last week, and I really, this has really helped me. It's like the first 3 pillars are like an internal stance you can take. So like to live consciously, to live, to accept yourself, and to take the stance of I'm responsible. Like I could just stand here and have all those stances or have the opposite, and you wouldn't necessarily know because it's an internal position I'm taking. Whereas the second 3 pillars are all about behavior and expression in the world.
Yeah.
And I think the practice of self-assertion is like the expression of self-acceptance. Like once you know what you want and need and what your values are, then only from that platform can you take the next step of expressing it to the world and people in it.
Yeah. That maybe leads us on to the next one of living purposefully.
Yeah.
You happy to move on to that one?
Yeah. So off the back of what I just said, if self-responsibility is an internal stance, then living purposefully would be the expression of that stance.
Yeah. He describes at the beginning, he says living purposefully entails 4 core issues of at risk of reading them out, I might just kind of
go for it
out there. Yeah, go for it.
He's a great writer. I'm happy for you to quote him.
Yeah. So the first one is living purposefully entails taking responsibility for formulating one's goals and purposes consciously.
Yeah.
Secondly, being concerned to identify the actions necessary to achieve one's goals. Monitoring behavior to check that is in alignment with one's goals, and paying attention to the outcomes of one's actions to know whether they are leading where one wants to go.
So this is all about like, if we know what our values and our desires are, actually getting down to the nitty-gritty of planning how to act by them. Like what actions are we taking to get what we want, and reflecting back of are those actions actually working and getting us the outcomes we desire.
He describes it as proactive, not reactive.
Oh yeah.
So taking an active stance to do that. And he said there's a quote he's got in the chapter that says, "Success in life belongs to those who do," which I quite liked. That resonated.
Right.
It's a really simple, short quote.
He quoted the opposite of living purposefully as being like a cork floating on water.
Cork floating on water.
Yeah. Just sort of bobbing along, drifting about.
Yeah. He says also in this, it's around like deciding what's worth doing.
Oh, yeah.
Make it, and that's what kind of goes back to those 4 points around, deciding is what we want to do and living by that, and then reflecting on whether that is in line with our values. So there's an element of like continual reflection as well when it comes to living purposefully.
Yeah.
It's not being able to change direction if and when needed.
Yeah, I guess that's that last bit of like monitoring outcomes. It's like, okay, so I've made a plan, sticking to it. I'm actually getting what I want out of it.
There's the elements of sorry, like delayed gratification in there as well. He talks about, and stuff around self-discipline we talked about in habits as well. So that's all ingrained there as well. It's about, putting in structures, routines, habits, being purposeful with your time, being purposeful with where you put your energy as well.
When I've been thinking about this, I was following this Tony Robbins program recently, where he gets you to kind of like outline your life into your core values, and then set goals and behaviors for each one of them. And I noticed doing that there were some for me which were easier to live purposefully by than others, and some which triggered much more like avoidance, procrastination, putting off, and like a desire not to be as conscious. So like there was some that took more effort to live consciously with, and I guess like making plans and setting goals forces you to raise your consciousness to what you actually want. And so for some reason, things like diet and exercise, rearranging my finances, like clearing my possessions, these are all things that like I could just sit down with a bit of thought, like set a few goals around, and I would sort of happily crack on with them. And then things about like creating content, updating my CV, like looking for like teaching jobs. For some reason there was this other category of things which I noticed even though I firstly, when I sat down to write goals around them, I would be more like, I don't know, this and that. And then I would be like, maybe it's time for lunch, or I guess I could hoover the house.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think there's something in there around like fear of failure, or like finding out what my limits of potential are in the realm of like learning and I guess work and production, and which for some reason is a more personal button for me than something like exercise, which for many people would be in the other category, right, of things to avoid, to put off, to never think about. But for some reason, that one, I'm like, that fits with my self-concept. I've been slacking recently, but I can get up and do that.
Comes a bit more naturally to you, doesn't it? And I guess it gets me thinking about, in this pillar, it's around, a lot around strategizing, setting goals, but living purposefully doesn't entail just doing. Like there's more to it than that. It has to, it's doing things with purpose, or doing things that you believe are worth doing, that serve a greater purpose down the track as well.
So planning for the future rather than just
planning for the future,
doing things today. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. There was something I wanted to ask you about that I highlighted in this chapter. Was he talks about that self-concept is revealed through purpose. So I'm wondering what that means to you, or how you understood that, because I understand that as who people see you as is through the actions you take and the values you live by. That's how you're perceived by other people.
Yeah.
But then I'm wondering how that ties into like self-concept. Does that relate to how you see yourself?
Yeah, I think that ties back to, when we were doing Atomic Habits, and he talked about this idea of identity, and that like at some point, so let's say you want to learn guitar, and you pick it up for the first time ever, play it for 5 minutes. You don't call yourself a guitarist. You pick it up the second day, you practice for 5 minutes. You probably still don't call yourself a guitarist. But at some point, you reach this threshold where it's like, I'm a guitarist now. And somehow you've taken that on board. That's what came up for me in terms of self-concept, that the more you act in line with something, like eventually it crosses this critical threshold where it becomes a part of your identity.
Yeah, that's who you are. Yeah. No, thanks for that. That's, I hadn't really thought about it like that, but I can see how it definitely ties back into what we talked about in Atomic Habits, and how if we keep casting votes for the identity of the person we want to be, strengthens that identity, and therefore our self-concept, the way we see ourselves, and eventually the way other people see us, as he's a guitarist.
And I guess it becomes as well as internally casting a vote for ourselves, if other people then see us that way and reflect that at us, that probably helps us ingrain a sense of identity as well, whether we like it or not.
Yeah. I think that does relate to the 6th pillar of personal integrity, around like being congruent, so that your words and behavior match. So I guess you're living in line with your values and the person you want to be. So what he describes as is the integration of ideals, convictions, standards, beliefs, and behavior.
Yeah, earlier when I was saying this difference between like needs and values, I was also thinking about that because I was trying to differentiate between self-assertiveness and living with integrity. I was like trying to think what the difference was, and I think the way I got to it was like self-assertiveness is like honoring your innate needs and like just what's true about your inner life, you're willing to express it externally, whereas personal integrity would be more like living in line with your chosen values you've purposely taken on because like that's in line with your sense of morality, and then living by those convictions.
What I wrote down for this one is that you need your values first before you can practice integrity.
I mean, this is what I part of what I loved about Nathaniel Branden's work, because I was interested in philosophy before psychology, and like it's when I learned that we're already all we already all have a worldview and beliefs and values, whether we like it or not, whether we think about them, whether we reflect on them. Like we're born into a family and a culture, and they're going to be instilled into us. And so you can't help that. So we're going to be living in line with values, whether we've considered them consciously or not. And I guess the practice of philosophy would help us consider what those are and reflect on whether we actually agree with them or not, and take ideas from other schools of thought, other cultures, and compare and contrast them, and then choose what to live by.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought, isn't it, that like you could be living by values that you hadn't brought consciously into your awareness. So
and
I suppose
sorry, just to interrupt, and you might have even taken a value on consciously, but that's like that's a drop in the ocean of consciousness. If you've been instilled with a contrasting value from birth onwards, then that's going to be so much more powerful in those choice points and when you make actual decisions of behavior in life.
Particularly in reaction to moments of where you're fearful, or you're being old traumas, old memories are being brought up. What behaviors do you revert to? And I suppose what this relates to in general is that like you can choose what those are. You have a choice to reflect on those and to think about what it means to be authentic to you. And what it means to live in line with your values, and assess like, are the ones that I've grown up with, that I'm surrounded by, do they serve me anymore? Can I update and refresh these?
He talked about this idea of like quite a common thing he hears is, well, only I know, like if you can do something in secret, if you can live without integrity but no one else knows, there can be a sort of sense of, well, no one else will know about it, so it's fine. Like I can so I can pad my expense account and no one else will know, or like I don't know, if I oh, I can cheat on my diet, but no one else is in the house at the moment, so no one will see that I've eaten this.
No one will see it, yeah.
And it's like implicit in that is that your opinion is the least important out of anyone's. Like, what does it mean to say only I? Like, only I is to say, like, I'm not important. Like, other people's opinions matter way more than mine. So when I'm in secret, I can live without integrity because I don't matter that much.
And do you think people avoid making decisions that sit well with them in order to please other people? So, like, a lot of people can go through life living a life just to please other people and living in line with other people's values because it's almost too confronting to live by their own. Do you think that's the case for some people?
Yeah, I'm sure it can be. And or that they haven't, you might not have considered consciously what your values are, and one of your embedded implicit values because of the culture we've grown up in is like please other people. Don't like initiate conflict.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a big one, isn't it? That final pillar. I found that one of the most kind of one of the most confronting ones to read. Thinking about, like, do my behaviors line up with my values and my actions, and how do I monitor that? And I suppose I was speaking to you earlier on about congruence as well, around being seen by others as I see myself, and the challenge of that, being able to kind of hold yourself steady in all situations, and that you're seen exactly as who you are, and the challenge of that in varying situations.
Yeah. Tell me more.
Well, I guess it goes back a little bit to, I'll just check the earlier one, around what I was talking about last week around, at work only potentially showing certain sides of myself that wanted to be seen.
Yeah.
Because I'm in a professional environment, so maybe wanting to not be as not as vocal about things that aren't work related, or not sharing as much about myself, or being a lot more patient than I naturally would be in some situations. I guess I've just been reflecting a bit on in all situations I go into, am I seen for who I really am, or are there different versions of me in different situations? Whether that's work, social, with my family. I'd say less so with best friends like yourself, where I feel I can just be entirely authentic. I feel the challenge for me is being able to be like this authentic in all areas of my life, and I think that is related to congruence. Like, am I living by my values? Are my words and behaviors lining up in all areas of my life?
Yeah. I had this quote from the self-assertiveness chapter. The refusal to fake my person to be liked.
You say that again?
The refusal to fake my person to be liked.
So I heard you the first time. I just wanted to hear it again.
I refuse to fake who I am for the sake of how other people see me. I kind of goes back to what you were saying about people from your music course potentially.
It's a bold thing to do in my eyes. It's a challenge to truly put yourself out there. But then I think about is what level of restraint or tact is appropriate in certain situations. Obviously, I'm not going to share everything with everyone in all situations. Is it about sharing, or is it about like the way I communicate, or the way I'm feeling inside? If I'm not feeling great, then I meet with a client for an interview. I can't necessarily afford to show that when I'm with that person in that interview. It's like,
I guess it depends on the purpose of what you're doing, because we have ideas and thoughts and feelings all the time, right? And he says that there's no it's not possible or necessary to externalize everything all the time. Like, because even as we're talking now in conversation, I might have 5 or 6 thoughts that bob along and flitter away, and when it's my turn to talk, I might just pick one of them. Like, there's no way of sharing everything all the time. So there's definitely a difference between externally faking something versus like selecting which parts of you to express or not.
Yeah, I think that's what relates to my I guess difficulty with like self-assertion in other people, is when I sense that the part that they're sharing feels like inappropriate to the situation. So I've always been sensitive to that myself. So in selecting what I share, I tend to go for a certain option in certain situations. I'll always go for the more conservative option at work. Whereas with you, I guess I would go for the more kind of expressive, open option of thoughts going on in my head.
Yeah. I guess so. I was just thinking then, you mentioned like when you're with a client or something. I guess when I'm with clients, my full intention of being there is to aid their growth. Like, that's the point of why I'm there. So I guess to the degree that sharing parts of myself would be in line and helpful with that, then I would.
You tap into those parts of yourself that is like, okay, I'm here to work, I'm here to do my best, I'm here to be psychologically with the other person.
Yeah, I guess I mean, like, also maybe I would share, like, if I did have a really rough sleep and was feeling a bit tired that day, and they said, "Oh, how are you doing?" Like, I might share that I'm a bit tired today, because they might notice that I wasn't as chirpy as I was last week anyway, whether I share it or not. And so if I don't say that, if I don't say that, it might be left like, oh, I want, like, was he off with me today? Was it something I said?
Yeah, something like, yeah.
Do you see what I mean? So
I know what you mean. Yes, I guess it's there's a skill in that as well.
Yeah.
Depending on the context and the situation you're going into, you know, what's appropriate to the cultural conserve or the environment that you're in, what part of yourself you do share. I suppose if it comes to the point where you're hiding all parts of yourself out of fear, or, you know, finding that self-expression is something you don't want to be doing more often than not, then that might be an indication that you're not living with integrity, potentially.
I think this idea of the appropriateness of what to express of all your being in any particular circumstance is really interesting, but I wouldn't want it to overshadow the main, like, that's quite advanced. Whereas I think in the majority of cases, it's like, if, let's say, you're in a business meeting, and the point of the meeting's a brainstorming session, you have ideas relevant to the session, and you're hiding them because you're scared of being judged. Like, that's a circumstance where that part of your inner life is the most relevant part of your inner life to share at that time.
Sure.
And you're hiding it. So the cases of where, like, you know, do I share this part of my personal life at work today? It might be a more like, he talks about, like, we only need to be sort of 5% more of these pillars than we were yesterday. And I think, like, that area would be like getting up towards 100%. Whereas for most of us, most of the time, it's like just sharing what is relevant to the situation can be quite difficult when we're scared of not being liked or being judged. Or
True. Yeah, that's like a whole other level. Yeah.
Similarly, with looking for a restaurant with your mates, like, in that moment, sharing what you want to eat, how hungry you are, and where you'd like to eat is the most relevant part of your inner life to share. And to hide that is, dishonoring yourself, as he'd say.
Yeah. Well, that brings us to the end of the 6 pillars that he talks about, the internal practices that we can conduct. Is there anything else you wanted to say on personal integrity before we move on to the external factors affecting self-esteem?
I'm not sure. It feels unfinished, but maybe I should think of more like personal examples to bring. Here's what I thought about actually earlier.
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't quite formulated yet, but I recognized that as I was like coming down the stairs to set all this computer up and meet you, I noticed, we said we'd meet at 9 o'clock, and it was kind of already 9 o'clock, and I was plugging stuff in and blah, blah, blah. And I thought, like, if this was a client session, there's no way I'd be faffing around with setting up sound and that, like, after the time we said we'd meet. I'm always there, like, before on time, right?
Yeah.
And so why don't I give you and this the same level of respect as I have for those other appointments?
Was it a value of yours to be on time and to be organized?
I think with this, I guess this would be more a respect of you and your time, and that just because we're closer, maybe like I'm more just like faffing about with it, which isn't fair, really. And I guess similarly, there are things, like, or even I could take it to a next level, whereas like, in terms of living purposefully as well, before we'd started this like podcast, videocast, whatever it is, we talked a lot about books we'd read, we'd share ideas, we'd have phone calls, and then at some point we'd be like, it would be really cool to express some of this publicly. And then we made a plan, we made it happen, we chose some books, and then we set in dates and we set times. So in terms of setting goals, living purposefully, we did all that, and now it's happening. Yeah. And I think I might have had similar ideas for myself, which didn't involve another person, but not put that same level of like, okay, well, let's make a plan, let's set a time, let's set a date, and let's do it then. And like stick to it and then review the outcomes. And there's something about in that respecting this more than respecting myself and my own ideas. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's interesting. Is it just around accountability, or valuing an already existing relationship, whereas maybe you haven't built that relationship with yourself to honor?
Yeah, I think it is accountability, but then the question becomes, why is accountability so important? Like, why is accountability to someone else not as important as accountability to myself? And arguably it's self-esteem, right?
Yeah, like you haven't got the I don't want to say it like this, but I'll say it. And you haven't got as much respect for yourself as you have for me, maybe, or respect for solo work.
I would say it's even more. It's not even as compassionate as that. It's like I've got less respect for my views of myself than I have for other people's views of me.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna show up and do this because like I don't want you to think badly of me and to let you down. Whereas like I won't show up I'm less likely to show up for goals I've set myself.
Yeah.
Or taking it a step back, like clearly because we're close or whatever, it's hard to say out loud, but it must be a subconscious thing. I have less respect for your view of me in this moment than maybe a client's view of me when I know I will be on time for their sessions and not for this.
Yeah, there's different levels in different circumstances. Yeah. And I suppose what personal integrity could be is that you show up with the same level of respect to everything you do, whether it's like something by yourself, whether it's for a client, whether it's for a friend, and that's what he talks about in this as well, that, you're you're trusted, that you'll follow through with things, and you're respected. So that in everything you do, I guess if you can build that for yourself, that you end up respecting and trusting yourself to get things done and do things on time. Like that's the ultimate, isn't it? It's like I'm accountable for everything I do, and I show up to myself when needed. I don't take the short.
There's no way that if I set the same level of time, respect, and discipline to personal projects as I did with projects with you or with clients, that after a while that wouldn't build my self-esteem. Of course I'd feel better about myself if I stuck to things I said I'd stick to, like regardless of whoever sees it.
Yeah, it gets me thinking a lot about how a lot of people are kind of very dedicated to their work but not to other areas of their life. So the fact that that's kind of set in stone, locked in, it's kind of like, well, I am whether it's begrudgingly or not, or whether they just embody it, but they're like, oh, I do turn up to work on time and I do get the work done, but when they go home, they might not, go to the gym, eat properly, not respect their body, respect their friends, their relationships. But it's weird how we give more respect to external things rather than to ourselves.
It reminds me of that study. Have you seen it where I can't remember who and when, but this researcher interviewed people dying of old age and asked them to reflect on all their regrets, and then sort of calibrated the most common regrets people have looking back over their life. And it's so that gives you a really good picture of values people actually hold deepest versus how they actually live day to day. And so they would have said, I wish I cherished the time when my kids were growing up, because now I realize that was a once in a lifetime opportunity. Or I wish I was more connected with the people in my life. I wish I really pursued the dreams I had. Things like really crushing things to hear, like old people say. And it's like, forgot why I was saying this. What were you saying?
Just around like holding more respect for yourself. In all you do.
So I guess that would highlight that those are your actual values, or at least for these people, those were their actual values. But years before living up, they were unaware of them enough and not living by them enough that you're living with that regret, I guess.
It's a big one. Personal integrity, it really is, I think.
And I think I'm repeating myself, but the reason that I had to think a lot about the difference between that integrity and assertiveness is because the word congruence for me fit both of them. Because it's like they're both external expressions of your inner self. But I think assertiveness is more external expressions of your needs, whereas integrity is more an external expression of your convictions and morality and values.
Great. Wow, I think that brings us to the end of the 6 pillars. I think we'll switch it up and move across to the external factors. There's a few, I'm not sure.
Can I jump in?
Go for it. Yeah.
Between the two sections, there was a little chapter on the philosophy of self-esteem. Do you want to?
Oh, there was. Yeah.
I just want to mention that. I've kind of covered it, but it was about like beliefs and what they mean. And so under these 6 pillars are all practices. They're all either internal or external bits of effort. But underpinning that effort, underpinning that action. And when I say action, that can be like action of thought. So it doesn't have to be a behavior necessarily. But underpinning that action is a whole belief system. And he calls this like the philosophy of self-esteem, right?
Yeah. And he talks about how they're like convictions as well, that leads to like that it would evoke an emotion that would then guide our behavior and stimulate behavior.
Yeah.
Which affects ourself and reality. Yeah.
And it's like, it's a really important difference between confusing the word belief with two different meanings. By belief, he doesn't mean just things we say we believe. Like, we might not even be able to articulate some of them. They're just so ingrained into our being that they're like felt and embedded and express themselves in the way we act. So like, we could say, I respect myself, and you might sort of consciously believe that when you say it. But if I only commit to projects where I'm concerned about how other people will view me if I don't commit, and I don't commit to projects that I set for myself, which I see as just as important, then clearly I don't have that felt sense of respecting myself, because otherwise that belief would guide me in that direction.
It's it's an interesting chapter just to get you thinking about the I like the bit how it evokes an emotion and stimulates your behavior.
Yeah.
You know, and he gives so many different examples of them, doesn't it, across the 6 pillars. But it's interesting to think about the self-talk and the beliefs you have, and even the way you talk about this to other people. You know, what you actually believe about your life and yourself and your sense of worth and your goals and your purpose. Like, what is the language you use around that, or is this all something that you haven't thought about?
Yeah, I think it correlates to core beliefs in CBT or cognitive therapy. That, these sort of unconscious guiding compasses, which we can be quite unaware of, but if we choose them consciously and then raise the courage to act by them, even though it feels uncomfortable, we can make them unconscious, like procedural as well.
Yeah.
It's like the difference between reading how to ride a bike and actually knowing how to ride a bike.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's good we actually touched on that. I do remember making a note on that, but thanks. Cool. So we'll go on to one of the external factors that affect self-esteem, and the first chapter he has in there is called Nurturing a Child's Self-Esteem. So he talks a lot about the conditions of childhood that would nurture a child's self-esteem, and talks about how the primary task of growing up from a child into an adult is selfhood, and an evolution towards autonomy and living independently. And he talks about a lot of things that would facilitate a child's self-esteem growing into adulthood and being an individual, and a lot of things that would get in the way of a child's building of self-esteem. I've written a few ones down here. Start with one that I found interesting was around acceptance. So if a child growing up feels accepted by their parents, they don't have to reject any parts of themselves. So that would definitely play into the, obviously, self-acceptance pillar of self-esteem. And were there any that stood out for you at all, or was that one that interested you?
So this reminds me, at the start of the book, he said about why he put the pillars and the practices first, and then the childhood influences of them second, is because now we can be like, well, if these are the principles we want to nurture, then we can reverse engineer that and look at childhood. And so if a principle of self-esteem is consciousness or acceptance, then how do we be such that a child will come to accept themselves?
He talks in this one in particular that it's around balancing a child's need of protection and freedom. So finding that fine balance between the two, because if there's too much protection, then you're preventing any self-actualizing and any taking and I guess a belief in themselves to step out into the world. But then if there's too much freedom, there's no structure, therefore maybe less expectations of behavior, less standards are set, less ideals to work towards. And I suppose it ties a bit into, if there's too many choices and you can do whatever, then nothing becomes important. It'd be harder to maybe ingrain your wants and your preferences if there's too many things to choose from, or you're given too much freedom just to do whatever you want.
Yeah. So then he was talking about like permissive parenting as opposed to like authoritarian parenting. So this ties right into attachment theory. So I guess the premise would be, I think one of the quotes in this book was like, first you grow roots and then you grow wings.
Yeah.
So in attachment theory, you like as a baby, you're completely dependent, right? You need support for everything. And then, so you have this external secure base, which is, the mother, the parents, the family. And then from this platform of a secure base, you can slowly learn to explore physically, to explore yourself internally.
Yeah.
And if that, so there's a balance there between when we're exploring and things become overwhelming, knowing that we have a secure base to return to
get back to, yeah.
And also that when we're exploring, that we are free to explore, and there isn't like a helicopter parent leaning over everything we do, and like
too many restraints.
Because that we learn what's and this is a main criticism of behaviorism from an attachment perspective. We learn what's scary. No, everything's scary. And then we learn what's safe from having a secure base and being able to explore the world from that secure base. And then we learn to find things more and more safe as our comfort zone increases and we explore more of the world. And so when a parent is calm and secure in our presence of our exploration, we learn that we can look at them and be like, okay, so this is safe because they're safe. Whereas if they're anxious about us, on the monkey bars or whatever, then we're going to learn that this is a scary thing to do.
Does that relate at all to the part he talks about around visibility? So getting, effective mirroring from your primary caregivers around. So if you went and did something that was scary or new to you at a young age and you came back and you were scared, having parents who were able to go, oh, that seemed like it was really scary to you. Or, you do something that's difficult and they go, oh, that must be really difficult for you. Having that effective mirroring would give you a clearer view on reality around what is scary, what is challenging, what interests you, what doesn't. Something I was reflecting on, a bit of a personal example, was around how, he talks about this strategic detachment from like your parents at a younger age. And I think for me, I moved away from my parents at quite a young age because I had a friendship group, you included growing up in the village, and we had quite a lot of freedom to, kind of go out and about and do what we wanted. To the point where it felt like I would rather be doing that than at home in a safer environment with my parents. So what I think happened to me is that I chose to place my visibility in the hands of my friends. And that kind of happened, throughout school. And I went to boarding school for a few years as well. So I was kind of surrounded by a lot of people, putting my sense of self and my sense of, self-esteem essentially in the hands of other people. Because, so basically what I'm saying is that I found, because of that strategic detachment, that I stopped getting accurate mirroring from my parents because I didn't really want to spend time with them. It was really around just where I wanted to spend my time. And I ended up spending probably too much time with people who weren't maybe old enough or capable to provide me with accurate mirroring as my parents would. So I guess growing up, if I like injured myself, my parents would be like, oh, that looks like it hurts. Like, what we're gonna, I don't know, when I cut my knee open on like the bike jumps or something. Whereas like when I'm with my mates hanging out, like everyone would just be like, I don't know, either finding it funny or I don't know, not being helpful, or on the other side, like kind of encouraging that sort of behavior. So it was kind of quite confusing to have that. That's my experience, I guess, particularly in the sense that we had quite a lot of freedom growing up, that I chose to be with them and that they would reflect back to me rather than my parents.
No, this idea of visibility was the main part that stood out for me in this chapter. That we learn to self-accept when. So life from a first-person perspective is inherently subjective. Only another can give you an objective reflection of yourself. This is sounding too technical because I think the idea is quite simple, but like we feel what it's like to be us, but then we also experience what it seems like other people see of us. And when that pretty much fits for most of the time, for most things, like that builds a sense of self-acceptance. And he talks about like it doesn't have to be agreement. You don't have to like placate everything the child wants, but you can express that you see the child wants something without giving it to them. You can express that you see the child's angry without accepting that, I don't know, their violent outburst is an acceptable form of behavior. So there's like this skill of like saying, I accurately see what's inside you, and holding that as a principle of parenting, whilst also not just giving in to all their whims and desires externally. Like you can be a mirror without, you can be a 100% mirror, or you can aim to be without giving them everything they want. And so that was, what the kind of technical thought I had on that. And I guess he talks a lot about, and he has a whole book called I think it's called The Disowned Self. And he talks about that when we have pieces of ourself that we've denied, it's a threat to see it in another person. So if I have completely disowned any grief or sadness in myself, I've shoved it in a box somewhere and I've repressed it, then I can't handle it if you're grieving and sad around me, because it's bringing my little repressed box up to the surface. I have to find ways to get rid of that. I have to dismiss you or leave. And so it's not as simple as like, do our parents mirror us well or not? They might mirror us beautifully when we're physically hurt, when we're learning, where like they might mirror us in all different areas, but like have their own personal things. Like they can't cope with anger, so if we're angry, that's it. They're not going to reflect that. That's just like, you're a bad kid, or like go to your room. Like there's no there might be certain emotions or certain things that were disowned and mirrored because they couldn't cope with it in themselves. So I guess the point I'm making there is that mirroring doesn't have to be a sort of blanket thing. There can be very specific things that can be mirrored well, and specific things that are disowned or mismirrored.
Something else that stood out to me is how there can be a sense of like learnt self-rejection. So, you know, if you're, for example, maybe growing up, you were like punished for making mistakes, or you were ridiculed for making mistakes, you can eventually learn that it's just safer to reject yourself. And what he says here is that you can't build self-esteem on the foundation of I'm not good enough. So if you were made to not feel good enough, that your mistakes were silly, or that your needs were unimportant, he's basically saying that's a really poor foundation for someone to build self-esteem from if they've had that sort of childhood. It was an interesting one. It's a good one to start in, I think, in the external ones, obviously from the beginning of life.
Your personal reflection. So there's a certain degree to which, let's say, around puberty, it's quite a normal stage of development to transition from family being the central model of our world and existence towards peers being that, as we learn to grow, I guess. And I was, if you are happy to, I was wondering if you would talk me through kind of the difference of that general principle versus like what you seem to be saying, that you maybe did that too early, or
I'd probably say that's probably it in general. I think the fact that we lived in the countryside and had so much, I suppose, vast space to go to, and we were all a really similar age growing up, so we were able to kind of have freedom with other people our age from quite a young period of time. Like home wasn't necessarily our base. Like we had each other's homes, and we had the hills and the countryside, and going like camping at stupidly young ages, like traveling, you know. I guess we weren't like stuck with the family necessarily. We could branch out quite easily with people at a similar age, I suppose. And that was just the same for like everyone in like neighboring villages and things like that. So it was, I guess for me, I'm just saying it felt quite easy to separate myself before that stage you just talked about, before I kind of grown up or whatever.
And you feel there was like a consequence of that, in that you're kind of putting your mirroring in the hands of kids. Which
you know, I suppose like I know that now, which is fine, but it's just like an interesting thing to reflect on, that like what age would you like, you know, and also going to like boarding school as well, and thinking now how since the age of 13 I've probably lived at home for like maybe 2 years and 3 months since the age of 13, and I'm like 28 now, so you know, that's you know, and some people here in Australia, they live at home until they're like 24, 25, until they've got their first job out of uni. You know, whereas in England, people tend to, you know, once they've left for uni, that's it. They're not living at home again, are they? Whereas
I think it's changed a bit. I think like recently, people, like I know lots of people who have gone back to their family of origin homes after. Because it's a whole like saving for mortgage thing.
I've missed a bit, haven't I? I've been away for 9 years. Yeah. Of course. Anyway, that was just like a reflection. I'm just interested in the fact that, you know, that's something that's you know, possibly something I've been I wanted to speak about the section on work, if you're ready to. So I guess I was thinking how both of us have got we're both in the field of trying to think of the broad field, like healthcare, social work, community work, that field, and we're typically working with people who are maybe in some ways at more of a disadvantage, whether health-wise, or they're seeking a service for help. Like they're in need. They're
suffering in some way.
They're suffering in some way, and there is some implicit or implicit power balance between the two. The two sides of it. And I suppose I've just reflected that I've never really worked in a workplace where it's been really, really competitive, that I felt potentially like threatened by other people's character or their assertion or anything like that. I guess I've worked in quite nurturing, friendly, kind workplaces. And haven't been in the sort of I guess my knowledge is so low on it, but like the corporate world where I just feel like it's a bit more like aggressive. I guess I'm just saying that I reckon my self-esteem would take a real dent if I worked in that sort of environment as compared to the one I'm in now. I suppose in working with people, I feel like I'm building relationships and learning, and there's less hierarchy. I mean, some people would definitely argue against that, but I haven't experienced as much hierarchy as maybe I was expecting.
Then if you were in like a cutthroat corporate sales position or something like that.
So you get my point. So I suppose I'm just wondering whether that's something you've reflected on in, one, the client base, but also I suppose, working relatively solo for the past 4 years, although you're part of an organization, wondering how you find that and how that relates to workplace self-esteem and how that impacts you.
Yeah. Well, one thing I thought about, kind of maybe a similar line in terms of living purposefully, there's like a cultural blueprint which you could implicitly follow and then not be hit with such a need to live purposefully. And what I mean by that is, like, if you go through a school system, a university institution, where they're giving you timetables, they're saying be here at this time, you're here to achieve these goals and to hand it in this quality at this moment in time. And then if you move from that to, say, a 9 to 5, then it's like, yeah, we want you here at this point at this time. You're here to do these things. Here's the structure to do it by. I'm talking generally, but like, there's a level at which you could get through a lot of that, and not have to plan anything particularly.
Yeah, not particularly purposeful. You're just kind of going run of the mill, going with it.
Yeah, because someone else has, like, people who set up the universities, the entrepreneurs who made the business you work in, like other people who have been forced to face living purposefully because they've entered a world of unknown to create a structure, and then other people join that structure and don't have to do that. And so I guess, yeah, like, I was thinking how to choose to be an entrepreneur would be perhaps a really good challenge of building one's self-esteem, because you'd have to take so much of this on board. You'd have to really plan to organize your time, to set goals, to know what your values of your company were going to be, to be assertive. Yeah. Like, and I'm not, I'm technically self-employed, but certainly wouldn't call myself an entrepreneur. But somewhere on that spectrum is a level of, like, I can pretty much choose when I want to work, how many clients I take on, who I take on or not, how I organize my time. So there's a certain amount of, without sort of setting up a business, there's a certain amount of purposefulness I maybe have to be more conscious of than I would be if I had a 9 to 5. But yeah, then that's kind of a bit off your point. But there's also the more, as you say, in the kind of social sciences, is perhaps a more nurturing colleague environment where there's no, I mean, I don't feel any level of competition.
Yeah. I think that's something I've thought about, that I've just recently got into a hospital environment, which is typically a bit more hierarchical.
Yeah.
Like, especially in the treatment teams that you work with, there's the, the psychiatrists and the doctors. And then there's, nurses and psychologists, and then social workers and occupational therapists. There's a whole team of people. And I guess just in general, I feel like I've been able to kind of hold my own and not be too intimidated by the hierarchical structure of that I've managed to, assert myself in the same way. I feel like I talk the same way to the psychiatrist as I do to the student who's with us for 2 weeks. I feel in general across like workplace that I'm generally like that, which I quite like. I don't know whether it's what that comes down to, but it was a nice reflection that I had, that I don't tend to change too much within hierarchies. I'm a bit more just focusing on like what I've got to do and my purpose there, and just kind of enjoy the people around me, as opposed to changing who I am depending on like, oh crap, it's the head doctor, or it's like the head of operations. I'm like, I'll make the same jokes, I'll say the same stuff.
That's
like
awesome.
I'll be the same person. So that was a nice reflection to know that I don't tend to mold myself to other people, but I have a strong sense that if I was in like a more competitive environment, I would probably struggle with that competition.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting reflection. Because on the one hand, you said earlier, there's a part of you at work that perhaps lacks assertion. But then it's also nice to hear you say, but that's not affected by hierarchy. So it's something else. It's not like, oh, I care more what the head consultant thinks and what the junior nurse thinks or something like that.
I guess just like clarify that. I do still like, I'm still working on, what parts of myself to share at work and things like that.
Yeah.
But as you said, it's not necessarily like to who in the organization. It's just kind of to everyone people in general. Yeah. So it's not complicated by the fact that I'm trying to decide between what to tell different people in the org. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. Otherwise, I'll probably sound like I was contradicting myself.
Hypocrite. So. Not living with integrity.
Cool. I guess just one final thing on that for me that this book got me thinking is, just the simple stuff of, maybe not simple, but the line of, if I brought more awareness to my work, if I brought more responsibility to my work, if I was more purposeful at work, what would that do? So I guess it's just reminded me I'm being a bit more thoughtful, and I'm kind of setting intentions before I go into work. So I know the moment I get off the bus, before I walk into work, I'm just kind of playing through like, right, what do I want to be like today? How can I get the ball rolling? What are some things I'd like to achieve today? How can I communicate a bit better? What sort of, those elements of self-esteem, what can I bring to work and maybe look to improve on?
That's reminded me of a couple of maybe hanging threads from Living Purposefully, which is, he talked about kind of criticisms to the idea, and that, a life of sort of goal setting and achievement doesn't sound very pleasant. It sounds kind of, almost lacking self-esteem, that you're constantly wanting more, constantly moving the goalposts kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the way he would agree with that second part is, well, you don't want that. That's just sort of a straw man for my idea. But that he's like, similarly with the philosophy of self-esteem, we will be setting goals in line with values and acting in accord with them, whether we choose it or not. Like when you're lying on the sofa, you get a bit peckish, you sort of unconsciously load up the Domino's page and order a pizza.
Yeah.
You've had a value, you've set a goal, you've made a plan in line to achieve it, and you've set those actions in motions to reach that goal. Like we will do this regardless of whether we set them consciously or not. So his point isn't that like you can't live, that do you live better by setting goals or not? It's that no, you are setting goals all the time anyway, and you are making plans of action to attain them. I just suggest you do it on purpose.
On purpose, I like that. Yeah. So I wanted to. This is quite an interesting section in the book. So self-esteem and psychotherapy. So I know you as a trained, psychotherapist and working in this field. And I guess the way in which he talks about it isn't necessarily about all just like strategies for psychotherapists, but he talks about like some good aims for psychotherapists to maybe work towards in the building of self-esteem, and how psychotherapy can support someone to build their self-esteem. Yeah. One of the first things he talks about in the chapter that really interested me was that psychological problems are not just around a lack of self-esteem, but a denial of poor self-esteem.
Oh, yeah.
So it talks about how basically people adopt behaviors to compensate for their poor self-esteem rather than lacking self-esteem. So something might be like controlling and manipulative behavior, destructive ambition he talked about as well. And that like by confronting this fact, that can help to raise self-esteem. So
that's a really interesting point, because you might only take on self-esteem as sort of a desired outcome of therapy if the client says like, I don't like myself and I want to work on that, right? Whereas if like if that's less conscious, then it could be easy for the therapist not to see that as a desired outcome. And then
and he talks about how it affects everything, really.
Like, but I think that's his main sort of criticisms of psychotherapies in general, and this self-esteem approach is that that therapies generally say like, well, this is our model and our method and our way of working, and as a byproduct of this, self-esteem will rise. And he's saying like that's, it shouldn't be a byproduct of the work. Like self-esteem is the thing to work on basically for so many other issues, and that so much of the time that's the core thing, that we shouldn't be seeing it as some byproduct that we'll achieve by working on something else. It should be kind of the main focus.
The main focus, yeah. How do you feel about that as a practicing psychotherapist? Is that something that you'd thought about prior to reading this book, or?
I might not have phrased it that way, but when I think of all the approaches, so like, let's say in cognitive therapy, you're trying to raise people's awareness of their thoughts, their assumptions, their behaviors, and their underpinning core beliefs, so that they then have, and then on top of that awareness, providing maybe a few skills to challenge those thoughts and behaviors and try something new, and that therefore will challenge the core beliefs. And usually the core beliefs are all going to be implicitly things of low self-esteem, like I'm unlovable, I'm not good enough, people won't like me if I'm not X, Y, and Z. So from that point of view, that like it's hard to think of a core belief in cognitive therapy that wouldn't implicitly imply low self-esteem. And then I guess from a person-centered perspective, it's all around acceptance, which is the second pillar. So yeah, I might not have thought about it in sorry, I'm just thinking of other thought forms. Like before this call, I mentioned about acceptance and commitment therapy, where like that's basically self-acceptance and then personal integrity and living purposefully. Like there's so many ways you can integrate these different models in.
And he holds it like central to all of this. It is interesting, to see how like different psychological approaches or different methods can still address these things. And he says it's hard to avoid like you are dealing with someone's self-esteem when you're working on these things.
And one thing that I think stood out for me in terms of a reflection that I want to more bear in mind with my practice would be, he makes this distinction between process and content. So in writing a book, you're largely, it's all content, because you're not sat in a room with Nathaniel Brandon, you're reading his text. So he's just like teaching you principles that you're reading. But in a relationship, there are ways of being which nurture the principles, which he's kind of saying that's more important than the teaching or explication of them. So when you're teaching someone something, in terms of what you mentioned earlier, there's perhaps there might be times where it's appropriate, and psychoeducation is a big part of therapy, but the more that happens, it kind of does imply a hierarchy, right, of a a superior inferior teacher student kind of relationship when you're in that role. Whereas if you're acting in a way that's assuming the other person is efficacious, is worthy of happiness and respectful, and that you're talking and acting as if they are capable of, let's say, a lot more than they might believe they are at that moment in time, that's a perhaps a stronger way of being than maybe like goal setting or teaching to get the principles across.
Gotcha. Yeah. It's it's an interesting chapter. I find it particularly interesting because working with people, there's obviously some things you can apply in any kind of conversation you have with someone anyway. Like is what you're talking about supportive of their self-acceptance, bringing consciousness to the problem or issue they're bringing to you. And something that stood out to me here was around he talks about like survival strategies around minimizing pain and rejection, and it's important for us to get in contact with like our needs and find solutions to that. That's something I find I do at work, trying to work with people to help them see their issue clearly and then formulate strategies and goals around that. It's quite a key part of working within a recovery model within mental health settings, trying to get people to working with like genuinely holding hope with them and believing that change can be made. And we talk a lot about supportive risk as well. When people are going, like, people should be supported to take risks and assess that themselves. So I guess that comes around like living purposefully in the sense that allowing people to make choices about how they solve the issues in their life or how they recover from the illness they've come in with.
So nurturing their self-responsibility and purposefulness, living purposefully.
And giving them choices as opposed to just telling them what to do. As well, that's a big part of it. Giving a bit of agency, a bit of providing some autonomy, and even that word like providing autonomy, like
assuming autonomy, like assuming that they're responsible.
That's it. Yeah, I'm glad I had a chance to correct myself there. But it's particularly this section stood out as I'm working or trying to work within a recovery model within a medical model. So
which is difficult, isn't it? Because the medical model is inherently superior, inferior, doctor-patient, and then
I think it seems. I always feel like I know exactly what to say. It seems unfair when to call it like an entirely medical model when I've seen like the doctors I work with are very recovery oriented, which is really lovely to see, and it's great to be a part of a team like that. But
that's because they've integrated other models, right? Like the person-centeredness, humanistic approaches.
Of course, and then I've worked in other workplaces where it's just really like prescriptive and just everyone's a But interesting. Thinking about that. How do we nurture self-esteem and all the elements of this that are really important to just happy living in general and positive outcomes in someone's life through recovery. It stood out to me and related a lot to the work section in this. There's something I wanted to ask you about the part around integrating sub-personalities. Talks about like there's different parts of ourselves, so whether that's the child self or the teenage self he talks about. Talks about the mother self, the father self, the outer self and the inner self, all these different elements that are made up of our emotions, values, needs and responses. I wonder, is that something that interests you in your practice and something that you work a lot with? So I know you've spoken about in acceptance and commitment therapy, you've given examples of times you've practiced getting people to be nurturing and kind to their child self, asking them how they would approach them. And
so
that would stand out to you?
So it's, again, with all these psychotherapy models, it's like one of those ideas that have been like replicated in just slightly different ways in loads of different models. So there's like internal family systems therapy is based on this, where you're just a bunch of sub-personalities that you're learning to let all have a seat at the table, and that they can all communicate and get on and not deny each other and that sort of thing. And yeah, compassion focused therapy talks a lot about different parts of yourself, like nurturing the wounded inner child part, that sort of thing. And he mentioned in the book, like TA, transactional analysis, where you've got the parent, adult, child model.
They're like ego states, aren't they? As opposed to like emotions, values, and needs. It's more of a ego state. He did mention there was a difference between the two that I wanted to ask you about, actually.
Okay, so I think they would still be the same in the sense that their ego states is just another word for a subpersonality. So like, or a part or a subpart or whatever you're going to call it. But it's like so rather than having like, so we have different emotions. We feel different things at different times, and we have different wants at different times, different ideas at different times. But it's like more than that. It's more like we have patterns of like roles, entire roles we can step into. And like I might step into one role which has a whole belief system and set of assumptions and axioms, and set into another role which has perhaps a whole different belief system. So it's like, and that will have its own responses and reactions. So
he talks about I was going to say, he talks about like seeing each of those sub-personalities, like getting familiar with them and understanding them, and then balancing the roles between them.
Yeah, and
integrating them, but then like finding a balance between them.
I think the part you asked about the difference between ego states, I think from what I remember of reading this book, his distinction between what he was talking about in ego states and transactional analysis is that like we don't just have, so in transactional analysis you have this like inner parent, and he was like that's not a helpful concept, because we definitely have like an internal mother and a father who might have very different like when we're in that role, that they might be very different from one another. So it's not helpful to blend them into this concept of parent. That's the main distinction I remember him talking about. And I think also with the child, like you say, there's very distinct teenage self, which is different from that sort of prepubescent child self.
Yeah, the one that's kind of emerging into independence and breaking away from. Yeah, and he gives examples about how, asking what part of yourself is reacting in a certain situation sometimes. Like, can you see like, oh, this is just my teenage self like kicking off, or is this the child self who's afraid at this moment in time, or have I adopted some of the mannerisms of the father self, or whatever. Really interesting stuff. I mean,
he talked about walking out the office with his last client of the day, and the client was like, "Oh, it's cold tonight," and he was like, "Oh, you came here in winter without a sweater on," and like his client was like surprised. He's like, "Oh, just ignore me. That was my mother talking."
That's I really like that example.
Yeah,
that's funny. Cool. So the last chapter, the external factors, was culture.
Oh yeah.
Culture and self-esteem. So he says that self-esteem is kind of quite a recent Western idea, but that it is like understood and pervasive in all cultures.
Yeah,
but he's not necessarily it's kind of only pervasive in Western, but he talks. Or I guess something I just want to reflect on is like, I guess as a broad question to get us going. Like, did growing up in England like close off certain parts of, self-expression? I guess we spoke about it a bit earlier, and around that self-acceptance. I'm just really interested to know what your thoughts are about the culture of where we grew up and how England affects people's self-esteem. I guess I've got my ideas, but I'd love to hear yours.
Well, I think like speaking really broadly and generally, like you probably couldn't live in a more in terms of history, in a more sort of individualized and respecting of the growth of the individual than like in the sort of modern West.
Yeah.
So like it's positive in that respect that, you know, there's not a like rigid caste system or like this sort of feudal culture or like slavery. Like these are extremes, but just in a broad sense of where you could be in history. Like,
where you could be,
got it pretty good. And so I think in general, sort of the autonomy of the individual is pretty well. I don't want to talk out of my depth. Yeah. There's a lot of self-sacrifice in Christianity, but I think there is also a respect for the individual in Christianity. And I think that sort of, that pervades the underlying culture in a helpful way, that the individual does matter. We're not just a collective piece, like of the puzzle.
I guess just my point is that like when you think of even more individualistic cultures such as like America and like, you know, the American dream and some of the I suppose like areas of like self-expression and the entrepreneurship there seems a lot more vibrant and acceptable compared to that of England. I suppose just in England it seems in my eyes, what I learned was that if you push yourself or try to exceed, it's almost like putting other people down, especially if you talk about it, like going outside of your area, or like pushing yourself more than other people do, is seen to be there's an air of like arrogance. You think you're better than us. I mean, that's just my experience of maybe growing up in the small village we did. I know, you know, when my dad grew up in Wolverhampton and things like that, you know, people had very set jobs they did and stayed within set structures. And then if someone kind of broke out of that or married outside of that as well, it was kind of seen.
Definitely
an assault on the norm. Yeah, it's like an assault on the norm. So
yeah,
I suppose I've always like felt that cautiousness kind of with me when I'm exerting myself, or, you know, asserting myself. Yeah,
I think it happens in the States as well. Like, do you are you familiar with Good Will Hunting?
No, I haven't seen that.
Oh, okay. So these guys in Boston, they're
it's a movie, right?
Yeah. So they're construction workers, but one of them is like sort of a secret genius. And the Ben Affleck character, you know, thankfully, like, has his mate who's this secret genius. Like, he has good intentions for him and does like nurture his growth to go and be more than he can be. But like the general like building site kind of culture was like, who the hell do you think you are to try and be more than this, you know? And I think there are like pockets of American culture which have that as well, where it's like, I see what you mean. And maybe rural areas or kind of rigid family systems, it's like, who are you to try and
industrial areas as well.
Yeah.
And I think
you to try and get out of this. I think he talked about it in the book as like, you know, like when you're in I don't know how to put it. There's no non-PC way of saying, but like a sort of maybe a lower working class kind of culture, then if you aspire and try to be more, then you're kind of proving to other people that, well, maybe you could be more too, and that could be quite confronting to face. So there's a kind of desire to pull people back down.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's it as well. What I'm talking about, I think, you know, England now maybe as compared to like 50 years ago, or just maybe the world in general compared to like 50 years ago, I just feel that there's a like that's it's like an undercurrent. It's just a sense I have in living there, that like what you're saying, that just there's that perceived kind of arrogance, or that perceived like, don't push yourself too hard because you make other people look bad. And I guess that comes around maybe like British manners as well, and the whole stiff upper lip, just get on with what you need to do, stop trying to excel yourself and try and be the hero, just do your bit for country. And having like the Victorian era, they literally like cemented over all like the inner streams and lakes in London so they could do more industry and put factories on top of it. They literally like stopped the spreading and the flow and connections of people and the rivers to connect people. They've like repressed that and pushed that down. I just feel personally, I sense that particularly in like industrial areas and rural areas, that I'm nervous to exert myself when I lived there. It took like coming to live over here to sort of feel okay about sort of pushing myself and doing what I wanted.
One of the things I'm grateful for about my upbringing is my parents working for themselves, and that there are parts of it I didn't like, but it's weird, isn't it, that in the kind of cultural blueprint there's this assumption that you get educated to get a job, but like you can only have a job if there are entrepreneurs that make businesses. But there seems like that's not so someone has to be out like making things from scratch and starting businesses, but it's assumed like the blueprint is that we're all going to get and I guess there are you could work for the state if in their institutions, but like outside of that, there wasn't an assumption that people would be entrepreneurs and you would make a business, right? There's the assumption you get a job, but then so I think that's an example of a cultural norm which is not nurturing the purposefulness of the individual.
He talks quite critically of like tribal cultures, saying that they're like anti-self-esteem, like they encourage self-sacrifice, and that your self-esteem is only dependent on how well you serve the tribe. I suppose it says like going too far one way with tribal cultures is negative towards self-esteem.
I think he mean like, it's fair to point out, I think he means something specific by tribal, not just like he means that has these collectivist ideals. Obviously we grew up in tribes for millennia, but I think there's a way to have a literal tribe and still nurture people's self-esteem. But I think he means something more specific. That in a, I guess, sort of communist collectivist idea that when the individual isn't respected, when you're just a piece of the whole, then that sets the stage for like, when we see individuals suffer or die or get killed, like the reason that's not the only reason, but a reason that is so gut-wrenching is because we have a respect for the individual. But if you can just otherize people as pieces of a collective, then it's easier to sort of, because he talked about, didn't he, like Nazism and Soviet Russia and stuff, where you can kind of, the psychological states you can get in to be able to just slaughter people, because it's if you don't respect the individual, then there's no empathy for that. I guess he's talking about the risks of that.
I reckon we're on to the final chapter, which he calls the 7th pillar of self-esteem. Which he throws out. I guess it's just a nice ending to the book, I think. And he talks about like a key ingredient to be able to live by all these 6 pillars of self-esteem that we spoke about earlier, and also, I suppose, acknowledging the 6 external factors that influence a person's self-esteem. And I guess one of the first lines he talks about is that, genuine self-esteem is what we feel about ourselves, not when everything's going well, but when nothing is all right.
Yeah.
And that really stood out to me as a core principle about what he talks about in terms of we need a willingness to live by the 6 pillars when things aren't going well. We're free and we have choice to respond in ways that are nurturing of our self-esteem and work towards the elements of self-responsibility, raising our consciousness, self-acceptance, living purposefully. We have a choice to live by those when things aren't going well. Instead of avoiding discomfort, we can choose to confront these things and be more purposeful.
Yeah, so the avoidances of immediate discomfort, like living by immediate gratification, that sort of thing. It's ways of avoiding any pain so things can seem okay. But if you strip all that back to purely, when I don't know, your wife leaves you and you lose your job, like that will be a time where your self-esteem is exposed for what it is, I think was his point in that. Like that will be, you might be able to kind of hide yourself from it when things are comfortable, but it's when things are challenging that you need, like self-esteem is most helpful, most important,
needed.
Yeah.
And he says the energy to protect it. Yeah. And it's interesting. I've thought about those moments, when I've had maybe a dip in mood, or there's been something that's gone on in my life. Like, what is it? Like, I think that putting more consciousness or more self-acceptance or taking more responsibility or living more purposefully, or all these elements of self-esteem, or living with more personal integrity, that's actually what's going to help me get through those moments, rather than kind of finding ways to distract myself or avoid the problem. That's what I need to do. And I guess it's kind of it's a cute ending he ends on that I do believe in, but around like the energy to do all this, like the willingness comes from a love of life, wanting better for yourself, wanting to improve, like that quite like humanistic approach of like we want better for ourselves, we want more. So like in these moments, your love of life is what's going to be motivating you to work on these things.
Do you remember the chapter about love in The Road Less Traveled?
Yes.
It reminded me of that, where it's like when he's talked about, the 7th pillar being to sort of love yourself. It's like, to take the stance of my growth and my well-being matters. Like, although in some ways that's also his definition of self-esteem. It's you can both simultaneously have a sense of not liking yourself, but choose to want to be someone who likes yourself, I think.
Yeah. Or choose to take the actions that would eventually lead to you being able to like yourself.
Exactly.
Working on those. Yeah.
So taking responsibility for, like, I say, I don't like myself, but not just succumbing to that, but thinking like, to love yourself it's weird to say to dislike yourself and love yourself in the same sentence, but I dislike myself. I accept that, and I accept that as a problem, and I want to do something about it. Like, I want to be someone who likes myself.
Approach it with love.
Yeah.
Or with at least your love of life.
Yeah.
It's I always find in books like this, when they end on something like that, I guess it leaves you thinking yourself, doesn't it? Like, what's after all of these strategies, or these practices, and all of these opinions and ways of thinking about things, it kind of does sort of come to I don't know what word to use, like a harrowing end to the book, where it's like, well, what are you going to do about it? Like,
yeah.
What's motivating you here? Because this book can't answer all of your questions. There's something that you're connected to, or that you're yet to be connected to, that is going to carry you forward and motivate you to do these. And I don't know if any book ever really will have the exact answer on like how to motivate yourself when you're not feeling, when you're not feeling good or things aren't all right. There's perspectives you can take, practices you can do, but there's always that small something that they're alluding to that, sometimes it turns religious, sometimes it just, he leaves it nicely because it's just one little line at the end of the book. Whereas like in The Road Less Traveled, he has like a whole chapter at the end about like grace and love and growth, and it's all like really lovely, but I feel like this one left me pondering a bit more about like, what is my motivation for wanting to address these practices.
What's the point in life?
Well, that's our next podcast, isn't it? Yeah. Well, I'm really grateful for you sharing this book with me. It's been, I feel like doing it in 2 parts. This is maybe one of our more thorough assessments of a book that we've done. But I'm really glad we did it. It's an absolute, I think I described it to you as like a Bible of sorts.
I was about to say that in the week. I chatted to you and you describe it as a Bible. And that resonated with me because it feels like a reference text that I will want to keep returning to and reflecting on.
Yeah, I'm really glad I bought the the paper copy of it as well, because I can I've got that now, and I really thoroughly enjoyed that and consumed it, and really glad we talked about it. It seems to get at you from like obviously 6 different angles. It really sort of probes you to think about, what can I do to raise more consciousness, raise more awareness, live more purposefully. It covers a lot, and I guess to anyone listening who reads it, I think it's a confronting read in some ways, because there's so much to it and so many different elements to it that maybe be kind when you're reading it if this is something that you might find difficult.
It's can feel like very high standards to hold yourself to, right? But like he does keep saying like just a little bit more. Like 5% is fine. Like if you're living really unconsciously, just raise a little bit more will do wonders to your self-esteem. So it's not about like having lofty ideals to live by, and we're gonna not live by the principles at times, which is why we need them.
Well, thank you.
Thanks a lot, mate.
Really glad. I feel like we've reflected on a lot there, so I'm glad we did that, and thanks so much for sharing the book with me, and I'm gonna probably keep that on my bookshelf for as long as I live, so thanks.
Cool. No worries. I really appreciate this, mate. I look forward to next one, which is a book on confidence. On confidence, written by the School of Life. So I actually attended a workshop on this as well, like a 3-hour evening workshop, and I obviously bought the book afterwards as well. So I've it's just a nice little short, I think something like 100-page book. So hoping we can just look at the principles of that, and bit of respite from a from a more longer, in-depth book. I think that's what's needed. I look forward to it, mate. I'll speak to you. Bye.